Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Assembly Committee on Veterans Affairs. And today we are starting our second year in our two-year session, and I would like to welcome all our members and the guests in the audience. And we do have a quorum, so can we hear the roll?
Salas.
Salas here.
Cook.
Here.
DeVore.
Here.
Gilmore. Huber. Liu. Perez. Saldana. Yamada.
Great. We have one item only that we will hear testimony on today, and that is AB 1378 by Assembly Member V. Manuel Perez.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Madam Chair and members. Let me just pull out my notes here. Thank you, members, first and foremost, for allowing me to present on AB 1378, which is related to our veterans. This is an accountability measure to ensure our veterans are a priority. Every veteran should be afforded the opportunity for a bright future and should be afforded all the tools and resources necessary to achieve success in their lives as civilians. Upon returning home, veterans should not have to suffer a diminished quality of life. During the fall, I conducted some veterans roundtables throughout the state of California, specifically in the 8th Assembly District, to discuss their most pressing issues. Many of those issues included mental health, issues pertaining to housing, education, jobs, and workforce and education. AB 1378 would help ensure that veterans obtain competitive workforce skills and the opportunity to obtain good-paying jobs that are sustainable. The bill proposes that the state undertake a comprehensive, systematic, and outcome-oriented look at how it currently serves the workforce development needs of our veterans. This assessment would provide key information on how California could have a more integrated and successful approach to providing veteran services with existing resources, including outreach, skill assessments, training, and job placement. Members, we know that California receives $18 million annually from the federal government. We also know that approximately 182 dedicated staff are employed at EDD and one-stop career centers to work with California veterans. However, veterans do not feel they are being adequately served. Concerns have been raised by the veterans advocacy community that this dedicated funding is not used to its maximum potential, and this is why we have introduced AB 1378. With me today is Mr. Bert McChesney, representing California Association.
Actually, Mr. McChesney didn't make it. It's Mr. Conity. Pete.
So he's here on behalf of Bert, but your name, sir?
Pete Conity.
Pete Conity is here on behalf of Mr. Bert McChesney, representing our veterans, and I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Mr. Conity?
Yes, Madam Chairman. Pete Conity, and my clients are also in support of the bill. Evidently, we didn't make it onto the analyses. But the American Legion, the AMVETS, and the Vietnam Veterans of America are in support of this bill. And the sponsor, CASVA, I work closely with them. And what we're finding out is there are too many stovepipes in the state government. There's like people over here in EDD do their thing, and they don't coordinate with CDVA, and everybody's doing their own little thing, and nobody's getting any synergy out of these efforts. So this bill will go a long way to getting some synergy. And one of the things we need to look at is giving more, and I testified in the other Jobs Committee that we need to spend more money on the Department of Veterans Affairs so they can, we're giving them things to do, and we need to give them some money to do them with. So I would urge your support of this bill.
Thank you. Do you have any other witnesses in support?
No, I don't, Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, we do. I see Mr. Hansen coming forward.
Mr. Hansen.
Happy birthday to you, by the way.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It was a great birthday. I'm here on behalf of the State Building Construction Trades Council to support the bill. The State Building Trades Council, in conjunction with our National Building Trades Council, has a very successful program called Helmets to Hard Hats. We receive federal funding. We just received funding this last year from the federal government to help support the program. And we've employed directly over 1,000 veterans in the state of California in public works projects through our returning veterans program of integrating those folks right into the construction trade. So we think that this bill is going definitely in the right direction. It's something that will be very useful, and we think that it's something we might be able to work together on to show how we've been very successful in placing people at a very small cost and giving a great career advancement to the folks who are returning back from the armed conflicts.
That's great. I wanted to ask you a question, if you don't mind, and open it to other questions for members too. But I do know that do you work with the EDD? Do you get referrals from the EDD to helmets for helmets to hard hats?
The way the program works, we do not. So right now we're not working with the EDD. We'd like to explore opportunities to do that. Our grant is with the U.S. federal government, and so when a service member is returning home and is going to be leaving the armed forces, they get a packet of information that tells them about career opportunities, and one of them is in the construction trades. So if one of those folks is interested in joining one of our apprenticeship programs, they get a leg up and get admitted as an iron worker, an electrician, a carpenter, whatever different craft that they might have experience in or they want to get involved in, and then it goes directly into our apprenticeship programs. And we've signed a lot of agreements with different public agencies that support having veterans as part of the workforce, and so it's something that's been really positive. LA Unified's alone employed over 500 returning vets in their construction programs, so it's been really successful.
That's good. And Mr. Betez, your legislation is very timely because we have just gotten back the auditor's report on the work that the CDVA does, and just this past week we had a hearing in San Diego County, and it was convened by my congressman, Congressman Bob Filner, who represents my district. And I think that we are in a very unique time in the state of California, and I don't think that this has ever happened in the history of the state before, where the sitting chair of the Federal Veterans Affairs Committee and the sitting chair of the California Veterans Committee sit in the same area. And so Congressman Filner and I have been working very closely to see how we can collaborate further on the federal and state level, and that was one of the recommendations of the auditor's report. And they did talk about the silos that existed between the agencies in the state of California and the need for agencies to work closer together. So your bill is so important, and important in the way that the EDD has only been successful in placing 52% of the veterans that it sees into jobs. And that rate of placement is one of the lowest rates of placements in the United States. And so your bill is focused on examining why that's happening, and I think that it's very, very necessary in these budget constraints when we have fewer dollars that the work that we do is really translates in getting the veterans hooked up to jobs. So I hope that the study also includes looking at how the EDD works in partnership with organizations like the building trades and the helmets to hard hats, and how they work with the CDVA. And one of the interesting things that I hope that it also examines is other state models and why they're more successful at placing veterans than we are. And in the analysis, I don't know if all the committee members had the opportunity to look at the Texas model that was in here, but Texas in a short span of several years went from increasing its successful placements of veterans from, I think theirs was like 54%, something like that, to 85%. By moving it into the Commission of Veterans, which is a specific for veterans only kind of organization within the state of Texas. And they did this without losing any state workers. I mean, they all just moved to a program that was dedicated for veterans only, and the outcomes were improved dramatically. So we have to be willing to look at those kinds of changes and make our service to the veterans more nimble. So I don't know if any of the other members have any comments to add to it. Mr. Cook?
Yeah, I kind of agree, and the question I was going to ask is, why is EDD running this? You know, if there's a disconnect or functional silos or that discussion or what have you, who understands veteran, if the primary focus is about veterans, who understands veterans better than the, you know, CDVA? Sure. And, you know, they're overwhelmed right now with a lot of the problems that I'm talking EDD right now. And I also agree that what has happened in Texas, I think, shows that if you have a unity of command, that somebody that can speak military to military, veteran to veteran, instead of having another bureaucracy that might not be able to be as empathetic or sympathetic to some of these veterans' issues. Why can't we do it right now in California?
Well, I think that the reason that we can't do it immediately and the reason it hasn't been done is that because these are federal monies that come down specifically to the EDD, and they're placed at the EDD, and that's where the funds are supposed to be expended. But that doesn't mean that that always has to remain that way. You know, it could change, and I think that this study...
Well, how did Texas get around it, though?
Well, I think that they went through the process that we're beginning to go through right now. And that's how that they were able to do it. But the money is sent to us from the federal government, and specifically, we must deliver the service through the EDD as the way that the federal funding is right now. But this is a first step in examining that. Sure. And I think that Texas was able to do it in a pretty small time frame. So hopefully we can move as nimbly as the state of Texas did.
I appreciate your point, but at the end of the day, that's what this is for, is to do that study and figure out, perhaps you're right, at the end of the day, it shouldn't be with EDD, right? It probably should go with CDVA, but only until we actually conduct a study we can really find that out for sure.
Well, the only reason I mentioned it, you know, it takes so long doing this, by the time it happens, I'll be in a veterans home someplace, and I might not even know what we're talking about, so.
Let's hope that's not the case, Colonel Cook.
Just one other point. At the hearing that Congressman Bob Filner and I convened, there was a person that was from EDD there, as well as the county veteran service officers were there, and some social workers that have had to try to match veterans with jobs. And one of the things that came out in the hearing was that the way that we've changed the model of EDD delivery services is very different from the days of old. And so I think that the way that we've changed the delivery service has actually impeded our ability to provide services to veterans, because now we place the DVOP officers in career centers rather than EDD offices that we used to have throughout the whole state. And so veterans aren't used to going to career development, one-stop career centers, and so some of the testimony that came out was the delivery model that we have in place right now is probably not the most veteran-friendly way that we're doing it. Mr. DeVore.
Madam Chair, to that point, it may be uneven across the state, because I am aware of at least one program run by the EDD where they have a very close liaison with the National Guard and reservists, for example, at Los Alamitos Army Reserve Center. And I've actually visited with them in my capacity as a state representative and have learned about their program and was impressed with what they were doing there. Now, perhaps that is unique to the region. Perhaps it's unique to the National Guard, where you've got individuals that already have one foot in the civilian job market to begin with, although many times when they're deployed for 18 months and they come back, obviously that's a little uncertain. But so I'm not necessarily comfortable in any sort of a blanket opinion about how the EDD is doing it, because I've seen at least in one case in Orange County, and I'm not sure how widely they've replicated it, but I've seen at least in one case where they have gone out of their comfort zone and actually done very close liaison work with the military to make sure that the veterans were comfortable. And in fact, the people that the EDD had staffed at Los Alamitos were themselves largely veterans. And so perhaps that's an interesting model that the EDD has done that the author may, again, as this thing moves forward, clearly if it's done correctly, we'll be looking at that anyway, won't we?
Well,
That may be the model.
Right.
That may be a model.
I just wanted to make sure that, from my perspective, they weren't completely flat on it.
Sure, and it's not about saying that they don't want to do this. It's we need to examine the methods that will best enhance their abilities to be successful in placing veterans, because that's what it's all about.
Madam Chair, if I may?
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank the author and certainly everyone who's here to support it, and I would like to move the bill, but with this comment that, I think the issue here is really flexibility. There is a single agency rule that the federal government employs. I know that when we had prior discussions last year about a mental health services grant application that could have been made through CDVA, but we know now that only the Mental Health Services Department could do a grant for veteran services because of some federal requirements. But, one size should not fit all. And it's really, how do we best serve the veterans on the ground? And so I hope as the discussion moves forward, we can work with our federal representatives and perhaps get some flexibility from them as well. So it's, again, veterans are no different than any other individual needing services, but they're special. So how best do we serve the veterans with these specialized outreach activities? It may be different in different parts of the state, as I think Assemblymember DeVore indicated. There are working models out there, so I look forward to this study and see what information we come up with.
Thank you, Ms. Ma.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more comments from the committee? Welcome, Mr. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's see. And we need a second. Mr. Gilmore, do you want a second? Mr. DeVore will second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Would you like to close?
Just very quickly, I appreciate your points. Points well taken. I do have bipartisan support. Joint author Nathan Fletcher, as well as our chairwoman Mary Salas, and co-authors throughout the entire Jobs, Economic Development, and Economy Committee. And so on behalf of our veterans for the state of California, I ask for your aye vote.
Would you call the roll?
Salas.
Aye.
Salas, aye. Cook.
Aye.
Cook, aye. DeVore. DeVore, aye. Gilmore. Gilmore, aye. Huber. Huber, aye. Liu. Liu, aye. Perez.
Aye.
Perez, aye. Saldana. Yamada. Yamada, aye.
The bill passes unanimously. Before we move on to our one item on consent, I'd like to introduce Pete Conity, who will introduce some of the witnesses that we had here in the audience. They've been with us all day. They came early this morning to hear a bill that was in judiciary. So, Mr. Conity.
I'd like to introduce some of my clients and
Public
veterans.
safety.
I'd first like to introduce Lorraine Class from Sonoma County. She was the first female post commander for the American Legion in its 89-year history and is serving as a veterans advocate. Bob Johnston is the president of the California State Council of the Vietnam Veterans of America. Ken Hullaby is the legislative director of the Vietnam Veterans of America. And Duncan McVickers is a West Point graduate, Vietnam veteran, and a veterans advocate from San Jose. So they were up here at the Capitol, so we came by. Thank you for allowing me to introduce them.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work that you do for our veterans. So now we have one bill on consent today, and that is AB 1088 by Assemblymember Fletcher. And do I have a motion? There's a motion and a second. And call the roll.
Salas.
Aye.
Salas, I. Cook.
Aye.
Cook, I. DeVore. DeVore, I. Gilmore. Gilmore, I. Huber.
Aye.
Huber, I. Liu. Liu, I. Perez.
Aye.
Perez, I. Saldana. Yamada. Yamada, I.
Okay, and I think, do we have anyone that needs to add on to the first bill, Mr. Perez's? Okay, with that, with no further business before this committee, that concludes the hearing, and this meeting is adjourned.